All right. So nice to have you here with us today, Cynthia. So
Yeah,
you
great to be
started
here.
working at Oldways in early 2003, just after Oldways had organized the 10th Mediterranean Diet Anniversary Conference, where we had just begun to kind of tiptoe into the world of whole grains. And we're curious what you remember doing to get the Whole Grains Council ball rolling, and in particular, what led up to the launch of the Whole Grains Stamp program.
Sure. A little bit of background. First of all, I started in March of 2003, but started is kind of a stretch because I was only working 10 hours a week. So at the time that the IFT meeting happened, where Sarah and Dunn were talking up this idea, I had only worked 18 weeks, which is 180 hours, which is like 4.5 weeks full time. So it was like, I did not have a sense of where this was going to go. And in fact, I don't even recall Sarah and Dunn telling me about this whole effort until around October. And I looked back in my old journals and on October 13th, I wrote, I could be the queen of whole grains. So it was really kind of fun to look back and resurrect some of that history while I was getting ready to talk to you folks. But anyway, we put our heads together in October. They're always traveling, so it was probably the first time they came to Earth since July too. And we very quickly figured out there were three things that we had to keep our eyes on in order to make the Whole Grains Council a robust and effective organization. And first of all, we had to figure out the best way to help consumers understand the health benefits of whole grains and their taste benefits and figure out how to find them. So the consumer side. And then you've got the manufacturer side. You have to figure out the best way to get food manufacturers on board by showing them that we can help them with their marketing and we can help to build their bottom line because, of course, they're companies. Unless we can find a way to make it profitable to do whole grains by educating people about them, they're not going to get on board. And then, of course, there's the third little part, the USDA and FDA, and we had to figure out what we could do that would meet USDA and FDA regulations and guidelines. So you got, okay, got this, got this, got this, and you got to figure out. It's like one of those old Venn diagrams in math when you were in high school. You got to figure out where that little place is that they overlap that you can actually do something that meets everybody's needs. So you have to make it a win-win-win on all three of those. And that's what we figured out. So as their first steps, I made a list of every company that was doing anything in the whole grain space at that time. Um, Before you can get to proselytizing with companies that aren't doing whole grains yet, you got to get all the ones that are already interested and show how you could help them. So that's what I've been doing for Oldways before this happened anyway, was doing a lot of cold calling on trying to get sponsors for other educational efforts that Oldways was doing. So I got back on the phone doing the old cold call thing and talking to people. And of course, it was very formless at that point, Oh, we're going to do this cool thing with all grades. Well, how's it going to work? Well, it's a little up in the air still, but it's going to be real cool and really effective because that's what we do at Oldways. And so we started with the six members that had expressed interest at IFT, and they were people that we'd long worked with at Oldways who just said, "Oh, we're getting killed by this low carb thing and everything. Can't you explain to people that there's grains and there's grains, and some of them are a lot healthier than others?" And because we had done that same thing, differentiating back in the 90s when we started promoting the Mediterranean diet, everybody said, well, you have to tell consumers that the best diet is a no-fat diet because they aren't going to understand about good fats and bad fats. And we said, just wait, see what we do. Oldways is going to explain it, the nuances, and it doesn't have to be all or nothing, and we'll make it sound good. And so they were coming back and saying, you guys did the impossible in the 90s. Could you do something with whole grains? So there we were. And I'm cold calling companies. At the same time, by November of 2003, we had a very rudimentary compared to today consumer site for whole grains. It was a separate website from Oldways, which was very daring and exciting at that time when people really didn't even know what a website was practically. And we wanted to start educating consumers at the same time we were bringing manufacturers on board. And we kind of ignored number three, regulatory stuff, for the moment because we had no idea how to even start on that. The other two, we kind of had a good track record in, and we could jump right in. So that was the beginning.
Great. I'm going to adjust something to try and make you bigger so that the following questions show you more prominently. Okay.
You want me to pull the screen toward me a little further? Maybe that helps too. Hang on a sec. Unless you've already got it figured out on your side.
I've got you pinned now. I should have thought of that at the beginning,
Oh,
but
yeah, right.
okay. So at the very first meeting where Oldways gathered with several of the food companies at IFT in July 2003 to establish the Whole Grains Council, Sarah remembered there being three main goals. And I think you touched on this a little bit, but she remembers that you wanted to really define whole grains and make sure that there was kind of a standard that people were using. To make whole grains as mainstream as extra virgin olive oil was becoming, and then to get on Oprah. So, can you tell us a little bit about each of these goals and how they were met?
Yeah, what I was talking about before was the three constituencies that we had to satisfy, but they were a little different than our three goals, which I remember slightly differently, but pretty similarly to what Sarah remembers. First of all, was definitely define whole grains and come up with the packaging symbol. The packaging symbol was there from the first as a goal that these companies at IFT were interested in. And definitely make whole grains mainstream like olive oil was a huge goal. And we wanted to do that. The Oprah thing, it was more of an in joke, really, when we started. As you go, oh, well, we'll just get on Oprah, and then that'll take care of, spreading the word. And everybody's going, yeah, how are we going to do that? So we continued to joke about that, and it really was kind of funny, but we didn't make an active effort because we frankly had no idea how you could. In fact, I think at the time they had something like on their website, like, don't call us, we'll call you if we're interested. I was like, okay, well, let's put that aside for a while. So we did concentrate on the first things. How do you define whole grains? It's tricky. I mean, you guys are still working on it today, aren't you? As
We are.
getting not only US definitions, but worldwide definitions. So all these international food companies and consumers that move from place to place can have one standard. But you have to think about, okay, if we're going to make some kind of stamp, what is it going to stand for? And what is it going to look like? And you have to make it clear to consumers what it stands for, or it's useless because it's not going to help them find whole grains. And you have to give manufacturers who aren't doing much with whole grains right now an easy on ramp so you can just sneak them into the whole party. And at the same time, you have to set up a scheme that has incentivization for moving up and upping your game as you go. And at the time, we're going, okay, and what would work for consumers? What would work for manufacturers? What would work for regulatory? Those three constituencies. And at the time, General Mills had been talking to the FDA about using some kind of good source, excellent source, which was in line with the long-term use of good source and excellent source. And they had gotten some initial positive feedback, although you always have to keep in mind that it is in FDA regulations that they don't pre-approve things. They just tell you afterwards what they think about it. So it's a little bit of a reading the tea leaves when you go and meet with FDA, and they're lovely folks, and they will say, oh, well, that would be interesting. And you see if they roll their eyes or whatever, and you try to get a sense. And you can come out of a meeting with a pretty good sense of whether something's likely to be a problem or not, because they want to help. So we had been told that General Mills had this kind of indication that this would probably fly. So we said, okay, let's go with this approach. And we did. And at this point, oh God, the early art for the stamp, we had something that had I think it was a barn and a tractor that the graphic director at Bob's Red Mill or outside consultant they worked with or somebody had come up with. And we had some kind of gas gauge looking sort of thing. And we showed them all to the members and say, what do you think? And they go, huh. They didn't really get a lot of enthusiasm. But by this time, when we had a little bit of a direction of what it was going to stand for, I engaged a local friend of mine, actually, who's a graphic artist. She was working part-time for Heinemann Publications, an education textbook publisher at that time. And I just got to talking about her and said, we're doing this crazy thing. We're trying to make a packaging symbol. And she and I went to grocery stores together and talked about, well, that symbol pops out, that one, oh, there's already too many red ones. It should be a different color. What's going to pop off the shelf? What works in different symbols, what doesn't? And we both really got up to speed on this. And we came up with the good source, excellent source, and 100% excellent stamps. And this was, now we're up to fall of 2004 when we had the first Whole Grains Conference and we introduced it there. And we had at the conference Eric Henches, who was the head of CNPP, the Center for Nutrition Policy and Promotion. And they're the ones who shepherd through and update the dietary guidelines. And Eric's a wonderful guy. And he said, I think that'll be pretty cool. Or I'm paraphrasing, of course, but he was all for it. And he was talking it up with the companies and with the food scientists we had there and going, this is going to work. This is so cool. And in March of 2005, the first companies had it on their products at Expo West. And I saw photos that people sent us of, banners with the whole grain stamp on them in the Bob's Red Mill booth and stuff like that. And the same time, we were just so excited about it that we didn't know where to start. And we actually got a call from Oprah about this time. So yeah, they do call you. We had something on the Today Show that I think came out of Expo West. And then we got a call from, I thought it was a prank call at first. I really did. This guy calls and says he's calling from Oprah. I said, oh, this is a Mike Orlando joke or something. But no, it was real. And they wanted us to send them information. And they said it was going to be on in April of 2005. And I'm going, we get our big chance at Oprah, and it's going to be when there's nothing in the store. She gets them all up excited and says, look for the stamp. And there aren't any stamps in the store yet. Do we say, no, thank you? But we couldn't fathom the idea of saying no, thank you to Oprah. So we said, oh, cool. Yeah, let's do it. And it got pushed back in their schedule from April to May of 2005, but it was still very exciting. In fact, it happened during the IFT and Fancy Food Show and stuff. Some big show was happening in Chicago when we were there, and we were, skipping the show to sit in our hotel room and wait for it to be on in the middle of Oprah. Anyway, it got on, and that was all exciting. And so that created it did help with cold calling companies, certainly. It's been on Oprah. You want to be part of this, don't you? So that was great, even if the timing wasn't ideal yet. And things were cruising ahead with great momentum in 2005. And then early 2006, FDA held a press conference and said, we've been thinking about this good and excellent thing. They probably had some changes of personnel and so forth. And we're not going to say no, but we're not going to say yes. And so it was really a limbo time. And even in their press conference, which we have a transcript of still, somebody asked them outright, so what about the good and excellent stamps of the Whole Grains Council? Are they okay? And they go, well, we haven't really decided that yet. We don't have an objection really to any factual statement about whole grains. It was just more tea leaves and harder to read. And this can go on for a while. So do we wait to see what they finally decide? Do we go in a different direction? Companies are getting cold feet. Do we have to change our packaging? So we said, okay, let's work on a plan B so we're ready no matter what happens. And that's when we said, okay, they've said a factual statement like contains 10 grams of whole grain is okay. So that's when we introduced the stamps with the grams on them. And then it was a whole logistical implementation nightmare. It's like, okay, we had 3 stamps we could hand out to people. How do we even get them all the different quantities of grams on all the stamps and get that distributed and make sure they use the right one? And it just added so many headaches to the whole process. But if that was what was going to take care of that third thing, the regulatory side, and how do we do this in a way that's still understandable to consumers and that the manufacturers will still get on board? You got to look back at the other two. And we had done some kind of rudimentary consumer focus groups. The first stamp, we had students that worked with different whole grains and nutrition professors in different parts of the country, went into supermarkets and showed it to people and got feedback. We didn't know what we were going to do this time. We said, well, we better do it a whole lot more thoroughly this time. And Bob Brown, who was nutrition director at Frito-Lay at that time, said, we do focus groups every single day of every single week. You want us to just throw in a bunch of questions about the whole grain stamp and reach a gazillion consumers for you? I said, yes, please. And so we did that, and it got a very good reaction from consumers. They really liked the factual number of grams because even though Good Source and Excellent Source are standardized, most people, consumers don't know their meaning. And to have somebody say, this is the amount, they trusted it a whole lot more. So we were suddenly realizing that this cloud had a huge silver lining, that we were going to come up with something a whole lot better. So that's where we were then. And it was like, we really thought the whole thing was just game over. There is no way to save this thing. And then we just went back to the drawing board and ended up with something a whole lot better.
Yeah, I think that's such a lucky, I've heard this story before, and I think it's such a lucky stumbling upon kind of process because I think the stamp today gives consumers even more information than that original stamp would have. And it's a clear addition to the information provided on the nutrition facts panel. And so it's easy to kind of sell it to manufacturers that way with the kind of the benefit that you're providing from a marketing standpoint, that you're including information that is something that consumers are looking for that's not already there. And I I think you landed in a really lucky spot.
We did, and there was manufacturer pushback. They're going, we
Mm.
can't tell you the exact formulation, and we can't share that. And I go, well, that's what you got to do in order to be part of our party. So they came around to that, and they learned how to do that, and we learned how to check and make sure they were doing that. So it all worked out pretty well. I think it was about this time that I gave Sarah that little wooden sign that she probably still has in her office that says something like, always remember that when you're in the middle of an impossible problem, that maybe it's just an opportunity to do something new and better or something like that. It's like, okay, we survived this one, we'll survive the next one too.
Yep.
Did the early stamp have like, were you guys using websites and databases to keep track of the original information back then, or was a lot of that in paper files? Like, what did the original, I know this wasn't on the kind of list of questions, but what was the original
No, as the stamp program
storage
manager,
process
you
and
would be
review
curious
process
as to
like?
how did that all manifest. So
Yeah, like
we
it,
had
I can't
lists on the
imagine.
original website. So when we got a new product approved, I would go in and add another line to this website that said so and so product, good source, excellent source, whatever it was. And we just had these, and they weren't sorted or anything because I didn't know how to do that. I was in charge of the website. I was in charge of getting the companies on board. And at the time, this was a very ancient website that had to be edited in HTML,
Mhm.
which I hadn't known anything about before I got in charge of the whole grains council. So it was pretty rudimentary, but it was state of the art for its time. Consumers didn't expect much from websites in those days.
Right. Did people like fax in the product information files for review, or did they upload like NF nutritional facts profiles,
I
NFPs to the
can't even
website?
remember. It's probably part of PTSD that I just can't even bring myself to think about how on earth we did that then.
I think there were big file cabinets that we emptied at one point that had a lot
Yes,
of ancient
yes.
paper forms.
Yeah, because yeah, they did. They did have to fax. They had to fill in some kind of form. Thank you. You reminded me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we
Well,
had them all filed
and we
away
used
because
to
it was
send
acrylic.
CDs in the mail to members with the graphic files on them. Is that right? I found a
They
stack of
had
CDs.
they had a CD with all of the files on it. They couldn't download the graphics from the website because we were concerned about, will they really download the right one? Will they reproduce it properly? Will it get screwed up and so forth? Yeah.
So we organized the first Whole Grains Council conference in New Orleans the next year in 2004. And I'm curious what you remember as the highlights of that event.
Well, I would say there were two real highlights for me of that first conference for the Whole Grains Council in 2004. One was introducing the stamp. I mean, that was huge. The idea that we'd worked on this for a whole year and here we were, at the starting line, as it were, with actually showing it to the members for the first time. Because we'd made these last minute changes and going with an actual stamp design like 2 weeks before the conference. We still hadn't come up with a good idea. We got it, and so most of the members hadn't seen it. And having Eric Henches there from CNPP and having him really come on strongly, positively about this um, made us feel really good. But I would say the other big important thing for me was meeting all the people involved. For me, before that, the various people that we were recruiting as scientific advisors to make sure we really had the depth of background of whole grain science, they were just names, and suddenly they were people. They were speakers at the conference. Same things with the people I've been cold calling all year on the phone about being part of the Whole Grains Council membership. It was like there they were, the nutrition director, General Mills or Frito-Lay or Bob's Red Mill or whatever. And to start forming really deep relationships with all these people was just such a wonderful thing. Probably one of the negative highlights is when our cooking demonstration set the fire alarm off in the hotel, but that's memorable too, but not in as positive a way.
What kind of cooking demos do you remember what they were making?
Jessie Cool did something. I can't remember if she was the one who set it off. I mean, we have all the conference
Program.
on the website someplace we could look back, but I think it may have been Anna Sortune making some kind of cough day that included bulgur or something. It may have set the alarm off. Anyway, they were all delicious in any event.
Great. So the whole grain stamp was created to help consumers who were having trouble finding whole grains when they went to the grocery store. What led you to identify that as one of the key barriers to whole grain consumption and recognize that a packaging label would be such a key part of promoting whole grains?
I think it was just common sense. If you're going to get on your soapbox and you're going to say, oh, look for whole grains, they're healthier, the next question anybody's going to have is, well, how will I know if I found them? And the stamp was just such a perfect answer to that. It was it was an important way of bringing order to the wild west of spurious whole grain claims on packages, because of course everybody, they still do it, but everybody was making all these claims about whole grains. And it was a good time to do it because if you let that sort of Wild West thing go on too long, nobody trusts anything anymore. So to come out and say, no, really, this is how you will know that you have found a product that makes a substantial contribution to your whole grain consumption and or is 100% whole grain.
What were the biggest hurdles early on with the whole grain stamp? Was it design? Was it the regulatory issues you talked about? Was it consumer acceptance or manufacturer acceptance? And
Oh gosh, how much time do we have today, Caroline? Um, there was a hurdle around every corner, but it was fascinating because the downside is when you do something totally new like this, there's no right way that you have to do it. On the other hand, there's so many wrong ways you could do it, and it's easy to find them all. There were hurdles in every one of those three different constituency areas. Consumers, you know, how do you figure out to explain? And even today, we see in our annual survey of the whole grains and the consumers, like, do they trust it? Well, do they even understand what it means 20 years in? I go to cocktail parties and they say, "Oh, what did you used to do before you retired?" And I go, "Oh, have you ever seen that whole grain stamp in the grocery store? That was my baby." And they go, "No, I don't think I've seen that." I go, "Oh, come on." So yeah, it's a never-ending thing. People can be pretty oblivious to what's in front of them, but we still do our best, and people do catch on. And I think that keeps you going is when the consumers say, "Wow, I see this. It helps me. I count on it." But yeah, consumers, we needed to attract consumers and figure out how to meet their needs. The manufacturers, again, you're playing with both ends. You're playing with the companies that are already really dedicated to whole grains, and they're just delighted to partner. And the ones that you can nudge up the ramp there. I so remember one bagel company that came to us and said, "Okay, we want to get this bagel certified." And we looked all through their paperwork and we said, "But it doesn't qualify. It doesn't have enough whole grains." And they go, "Oh, yeah, but our food scientists tell us that we can't put any more whole grain in that and it will still taste good." I go, "Oh, man, I would bet you guys have some pretty good food scientists there. You mean the people over at company XYZ Bagel Company can do that and you guys can't? Wow, I'm so surprised." And on the restaurant side, we were always doing that with chefs. If chefs would come and say, "Oh, we've tried making whole grain products, but our customers just don't want them." And we go, "Huh, I would have thought you were at least as good as Chef XYZ." It just played people against each other. But it's the truth too. It's like other people can do it and make tasty and healthy products. I think you can too if you just work a little harder. So that was the manufacturing side always. And then regulatory, you're just always on your feet to figure out, okay, what's the newest twist as personnel change or as rules change or as customers are doing different things and learning all those nuances like, yes, in general, the FDA has oversight of packaging, but if the product has meat in it, you have to go to USDA. And oh, look, they have different rules than FDA. And you have to figure out how you meet all of these things at the same time.
Mhm. I remember you saying that in the early days, a lot of manufacturers were hesitant to declare the actual whole grain amount that they would kind of lowball and use the 8 gram stamp um, when they actually had, 16 grams. Um, and that over time, you started to see companies kind of competing with each other on similar products. Who could
Hmm.
include more whole grain?
Hmm.
And I know this isn't one of our official questions, but do you remember when you started to see that kind of change happening?
There was a kind of mixed period there. We started with the new stamps in 2005, 2006, after the FDA came out with their, I don't know, press conference. But we didn't force people to change right away. We said, you can continue to use them. This is what FDA has said. And we think this new approach is a lot more in line with what FDA is looking for, but be it on your head. And so we gave them more than a year to change over. And after a certain point, I don't remember exactly when it was, and it doesn't matter. We said, okay, you just can't use the good and excellent anymore. And we still were going around grocery stores and looking and calling companies and saying, "Oh, I saw this in the store yesterday." Um, but anyway, shit, what did you ask?
I was curious about when you started to see companies seeing
Oh, yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
declaration of the grams as kind of a positive for them.
Right, right. I think we are the only organization, to the best of my knowledge, that regularly asks for product information. There are so many symbols that have come and gone over the years that we've been using the whole grain stamp consistently. Always a new scheme, and it's always going to make the food companies look good while not really saying to anybody what the algorithm is or why this gets the purple healthy label or whatever is the food label fad of the week. And we were doing something totally different. And the food companies had trouble getting used to giving us the whole wide range of information that they needed in order to qualify for the program. And I think people don't even realize that the whole grain stamp is not a trademark, it is a certification mark. which has a special meaning in US law that we have to look into it and they have to tell us everything we ask them in order to qualify. So that's an important distinction for consumers to understand how much more serious and solid the whole grain stamp is than a lot of things that they see on packaging. But anyway, after a while, we started going back to people who were making that transition from the old stamps to the new stamps and saying, you can leave it loosey-goosey if you want to with just the basic stamp on it, and you can put 8 grams, but the data you showed us show you got 15, 16, 18, whatever it is. And your competitor is now putting 14 on their package. I think you'd like to boast that you got 18, 16, whatever it is. And they go, huh, let me run that by our legal people or whatever. And then they'd come back and they'd say, I think we're going to change that next time we reprint the packaging.
That's great. When do you think it was evident that the whole grain stamp was truly successful, and what made you think so?
Wow. There are so many responses to that question because I think there wasn't any one big, whew, it's all downhill from here. It was always, that's cool, we've achieved that. Okay, but then we're going downhill and then up and down and up and down, like anything in life. There were so many points looking back that I say, wow, that really made me think differently about what we were doing here. Certainly, when Plan B for the new gram designated stamps took hold, that was evident that we were going to really take hold. When I saw the stamp in grocery stores everywhere, not just here in the US, I think it was the trip to Brazil for another conference that was an Oldways conference. It was a Latin American diet conference. And to go in the grocery stores in Brazil and see the stamp on products in Portuguese. Of course, I'd seen that stamp. I'd seen the products when they got approved, but you go in the grocery store and see it. It's a different thing to go to different countries and see the stamp there. And following on that, when the government of China came to us and said, we kind of like what you're doing there. Would you help us figure out how we can promote whole grains in China? And we went over there, we helped them run a conference, and that was something else because this guy, Mr. Yu, who was the director of the nutrition organization in China for the government, he had a certain conference program set up. And I had prepared presentations for that, but he was always turning around and he was saying, and now Cynthia will speak for 15 minutes on topic XYZ. And suddenly I'd have to do this improv theater to come up with some other topic that he hadn't warned me about at all. So that was an adventure. But yeah, and then of course, because we were a little wary, I had worked in product development in China for another company before, not food products. And we had seen how some of even our least successful products immediately got knocked off by the Chinese. So we then had to learn all about international copyright of the whole grain stamp and how that would work and all that kind of stuff. So that was another educational thing, but it was still a good step forward. Yeah, there were a lot of those steps.
What do you think the lasting importance of the whole grain stamp is?
Well, I think the fact that it goes on and on, we've alluded to a lot of things in this conversation about how so much in the food industry is a fad that comes and goes.
Mm.
And even Dunn, who had worked in the food space for so many years, kept always trying, as a good CEO does, to say, we got to be ready for the next thing after whole grains wanes. And I kept saying, it's not gonna. And he's going, they always do, Cynthia. You're too naive. And I would say, no, we're going to make sure it doesn't. And I really think we've achieved that. We have made this Whole Grains Council program so solid that, well, so many things have come and gone. The whole grain stamp is something that people can count on. And yeah, there's those people at my cocktail party that still haven't seen it on the shelf, but next year they will, and it will still be there, and they won't have to say, okay, oh, there's something else there I got to learn about. I'm burned out. No, it's a good, solid, consistent things. And you think of how many food fats have come and gone in the 20 years that the whole grain stamp's been out there. We're a legend.
I think you need a whole grain stamp tattoo on your arm that you can show people.
Who says I don't have one?
What are you personally most proud of in your work with the Whole Grains Council?
Well, as I mentioned before, I love seeing the stamp when I go to the store. It's really nice. I think on reflection, though, aside from my own little patting myself on the head, just imagining the thousands, millions of consumers that maybe have improved their diet even that much because we have helped them find the whole grain stamp. One incident really sticks out in my mind. It was still relatively early days. We had our second website, the real one that didn't need HTML to be updated up and had a lot of good consumer information on it. And it had a phone number that said call with your questions. And I picked up the phone one day and there was a guy calling from Detroit or Chicago or something. And he said, I went to the doctor yesterday. Doctor says I got the sugar. What am I supposed to do about these whole grains? He said whole grains, and I don't understand it. And to picture that all over the country, there have been people like this guy who really wanted to take hold and improve his diet and had no idea where to start. And we were there for him and thousands and millions of others like him with the answers that would actually help them implement an idea. That's what I'm most proud of.
Great. And how do whole grains fit into your daily life these days?
Now, I'm not talking the talk anymore, but I'm still walking the walk. Um, Definitely, most mornings I will either have steel cut oats or I will have yogurt with berries and my homemade granola from oats. Lunchtime is often something like hummus or peanut butter on a whole grain, Wassa crisp bread sort of thing. Um, Dinner time, we'll have brown rice or whole grain pasta with most meals, wild rice, bulgur, stuff like that. So yeah, I'm still right in there because I believe in this stuff, not just telling other people to do it, but I really think it's helped me be healthy too.
That's great. Is there anything else that you think we should have asked about that we didn't?
Oh gosh, we covered so many things. If you have any other off the cuff questions, though, after Mr. Yu's training in China, I'm willing to take them
Right.
on.